Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your interest in our talk, which is on building a tool that draws from the collective wisdom of the internet to help users respond effectively to anxiety-related questions. My name is Benjamin Kaveladze. I worked on this project with George Kaveladze, Elad Yom-Tov, and Stephen Schueller. So I want to break this talk down into three different parts. The first is understanding online anxiety support communities. The second is drawing from the internet to develop automated question answering systems. And the third is building a tool to help users provide effective responses to anxiety-related questions. So first things first, what are anxiety support communities? Well, to me, these are kind of the perfect places for seeking help with really personal struggles. They allow users to avoid typical barriers to support like stigma, shyness, and even physical isolation, just not having people around you that you can talk to. So for a lot of people, these can be a super crucial source of support in their lives. But on the other hand, there are also some downsides. They can be kind of misleading or even hurtful when you just have people that are going on there often anonymously. Sometimes their advice is not the best or can be kind of cruel. So in this work, we focus on subreddits, which are just one kind of an online discussion forum. So we started this work by doing a survey of mental health subreddit users. We got over 300 users from 10 different mental health subreddits. And we wanted to know three questions. First, who uses mental health subreddits? And we found that 82% of people that we surveyed rated their mental health as terrible or poor. Next, we asked, why do they use these spaces? And we found that users felt that the spaces offered them advice, encouragement, a sense of belonging to a community, and a sense of validation because they saw other people that had experienced what they had experienced and they could connect on that level. And almost everybody that we surveyed felt that the subreddit that their subreddit they used was a helpful force in their life. Finally, we asked, how can these spaces be improved? And we found that less negativity and less bad advice would be a real improvement. And then here on the right, you can see some of our qualitative coding about downsides of mental health subreddits. So negativity is a big one, misinformation is another one, and disturbing or triggering content is also a problem. So then we start to focus on questions and answers about anxiety and how those show up in these spaces. So asking questions is really common in online anxiety communities. A typical interaction goes like this. A user posts asking for help, and other users comment on that post to offer their support. And there are over 15,000 question response interactions like that one that occur every single year on one subreddit alone. So really a lot of information being passed. So next, that moves us to our other part of the talk, which is drawing from the internet to develop automated question answering systems. So the way that we're framing this question is kind of accessing the internet's collective wisdom. So to us, the internet offers a corpus of wisdom on anxiety that is unprecedented in its size and the diversity of its contributors. There's people from all around. There's no library in the world that could compare. Even all the libraries in the world cannot compare to all this information on the internet. So some of this information is in archived question response interactions from online communities. And you can also find some wisdom in informational resources like articles and videos that people post or maybe groups post just to inform people about anxiety-related issues. So our question is, what if you could memorize all that information? Well, we think you might learn how to write a really good response to an anxiety-related question. And our next question to follow up with that is, can computer systems help us to do this? Just because it would probably be hard for me to remember 15,000 question response interactions plus all those informational resources. So can computers help us to make sense of all this information? So that leads us to question answering or QA systems, which use computers to answer human questions. So here on the right, we have an example of a QA system. A user might ask the system, who was the first president of the United States? The system then processes that question and retrieves a relevant document. For example, this might be like a Wikipedia page of all of the US presidents in history, extract the relevant information from that page, and then display it back to the user. So in this case, it would display the answer, George Washington. So our idea for this project is to make a question answering system for anxiety-related questions. But of course, anxiety-related questions can be harder to answer than just simple fact-finding questions. And that's because the responses should be both accurate and empathic. They have to be kind and they have to be thoughtful. And often there's not a clear response to an anxiety-related question. So a bit more tricky. So we got started on this by building two different question answering systems. The first one finds relevant responses from past interactions on support communities, just like those communities that I discussed previously. And the second finds relevant informational resources, like online resources, like the articles and videos that I mentioned. So for the first system, the goal is to find relevant responses from past support interactions. We broke this down into 5 steps. So the first step is to get a whole bunch of questions and responses from anxiety subreddits, all these interactions. The second step is to hand rate the quality of a subset of those responses. And the third step is to use that hand rated data to train a machine learning classifier to label responses as either high quality or low quality. The fourth step is to match new questions to high quality responses from similar questions in the past. So drawing on that big data set of questions and responses to find a similar question and find a good answer to that question. And then finally, we wanted to evaluate the question answering system. Okay, so for step 1 and 2, we first got 12,325 question response pairs from anxiety subreddits, and we obtained quality ratings using help from crowdsourced workers and also research assistants to rate 800 responses. So here on the left, you see an example of a question and a response. We know this is a pretty high quality response because we see that it contains some emotional support as well as some informational support. And in general, it's just a useful kind of response, something that could be helpful. So we asked our raters to imagine that they wrote this post, and then how would they feel? How well would they feel that this response responds to their question? And that was the question that we asked them. We also asked them to indicate whether a response had emotional support and informational support. So here on the right, you can see the distributions of emotional support and informational support and just overall response quality across all the questions. All right, the next step is identifying high quality responses to questions. That was that classification model that I mentioned. So we trained a random forest model to classify responses as high or low quality. To do that, we included 31 different lexical and metadata features. Lexical refers to features having to do with language. So this is stuff like how many words are in a response, how many characters, or features like the percentage of positive words like happy, joyous, stuff like that. And then metadata features refers to data about the post itself. So this can be things like post score. On Reddit, each user has the ability to upvote or downvote each post, and upvote is like a +1, downvote is like a -1. So when you sum up all of the upvotes and downvotes on a post, you get that post score. And that, excuse me, and then when you sum up all of the scores of users' posts across their whole Reddit career, you get their user karma, which is kind of a measure of their reputation on the page. All right, so in the end, this model classified responses as high or low quality accurately 72% of the time. So random chance would be 50% of the time. So this definitely outperforms random chance. This is like a pretty good model. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And then I wanted to just point out a couple of interesting features from our model. So first of all, the response length was by far the most predictive of the response quality. Readability of a response was also pretty predictive. Shockingly to me, the response score was basically not at all predictive of response quality. So the amount of like upvotes and downvotes, like basically the community's impression, you would think, of a response did not actually relate to that response's helpfulness, according to our raters. So I don't really know what to make of that, but I think it's interesting and could be worth some future research. So finally, we looked into finding relevant responses for new questions. So we used our response quality classifier, the one that I just talked about, on a larger data set of anxiety questions and responses in order to label all of those responses as like high quality or low quality. And basically, we just kept all of the high quality ones and got rid of the low quality ones. So just high quality responses. Next, to find a relevant response to a question, we calculated linguistic similarity between each new question and previous questions. So that helped us to find a relevant response from a previous question to a new question. And then finally, we recruited a bunch of workers from Prolific to test the system's effectiveness. So we got 106 workers to rate the response quality, a bunch of responses. Those responses were either randomly selected, so like a random response from our big data set of responses, like we had them rate whether that was a helpful response to a given question. So it really shouldn't be very good, those random responses. Then we had them rate the QA system selected responses. So this is like our system. This is what it predicts would be a helpful response to a question. And then finally, we had them rate the original response, like what did an actual human respond to that question with? So we found that the QA system responses were certainly better than a random response, but they were not at all close to being as good as a human response. So our conclusion is that the system does not reliably provide high quality responses, but is headed in the right direction. So maybe with some tweaking, some more work, some more data, it might get better over time. So now we can move on to our second question answering system, a little bit more straightforward, which is intended to find a relevant online informational resource for a certain question. So to start this, we put together a list of 80 trusted online informational resources that had to do with anxiety. So anything that was a trusted resource had to do with like a common anxiety related question. So next, we developed a multi-class learning model to match questions to a relevant online resource. And this model selected the same resource as a human did 51% of the time, which was 40% better than random chance. So this is really not too bad. The model suggested relevant responses or relevant resources with pretty fair reliability. So could be useful. All right, now we kind of put together everything that we talked about into one tool that we want to use to help users respond to new anxiety-related questions. So what is our overall goal? It is to improve the availability of effective support on online anxiety support communities. That's our big goal. So towards this goal, our aim is to build a tool that helps users quickly produce high-quality responses to anxiety-related questions. All right. So as we saw, our QA systems were not very reliable on their own. So we wondered, what should we do with this? And we figured, what if we include a human supporter into the question answering process? So what do I mean by that? So in the typical QA system, a human asks a question, the computer does this whole loop and then provides an answer back. We're thinking about adding a human supporter into basically the second half of that loop. So the human supporter gets from the system a relevant response and a potentially relevant resource. And the human supporter has to decide, is this response helpful? Is this resource helpful? Am I going to be able to like pass on this resource to someone? Or can I use this response as like a building block in order to write my own response to help someone out? Okay. So here's an example of what that tool might look like. We might have a user enter in a URL of a question that they saw while browsing Reddit. And then the response helper tool, which is like the tool that we're making, would provide them a possibly relevant response. Here's just an example response. And a possibly relevant online resource. Here's an example. And then it will also ask them to give some feedback back to the tool so that the tool can learn. So it'll ask them, did this help you to write your own response? They say yes or no. Did this help you to write or did this resource help you to write your own response? Yes or no. And then that information will be able to be fed back into the system to improve it. Okay. So our last thing to talk about is implementing this tool actually in the support communities and next steps. So our next step is to share this tool with a group of subreddit users and moderators for them to use in their communities and to get feedback, like that user research to give us an understanding, do they find it useful? And is it creating better responses? We really think that it's important to frame this tool appropriately and thoughtfully to make sure that users understand its strengths and limitations. Like this is not some magical AI that will provide you the perfect response because it really has all of the collective wisdom. Like, yeah, hopefully that is the goal. But at this point, it's just like maybe finding a kind of relevant response that a different person wrote. It's very far from magic. So we have to make that clear to people. And then finally, it'll be essential to work closely with online support communities throughout this whole process. We talked to a bunch of moderators of different mental health subreddits, and they all stress that just communicating with them, talking to users will be really important to make sure that their needs are being met and then really helping who it's meant to help. Okay, that's it. I want to say thank you to my collaborators. First of all, my big brother, George Kaveladze, who's been so helpful. Elad Yom-Tov, who's provided great guidance. And Stephen Schueller, my advisor, who really advised me through this whole thing and has been excellent. So I also want to thank you for your attention. I really appreciate it. Here's my email and my Twitter. All right, bye.